Hey, what's up? My name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be doing my May wrap-up. Already the end of May. Summer is upon us. I am not ready for this. And in the month of May, I actually had a really great reading month. I was able to read 15 books in the month of May, which is very exciting. But before we do get into all of the books, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Ana Luisa for sponsoring today's video. I've worked with Ana Luisa a few times now. If you didn't know, they're a jewelry brand. They sell necklaces, earrings, rings, bracelets, different things like that. Something that I really love about Ana Luisa is the fact that their jewelry is so sustainable because they offset 100% of their carbon emissions. I think that these pieces are a great gift for yourself if you're looking to treat yourself, or I think they're a really unique gift for a loved one. They offer speedy delivery all around the world, and their prices are fair. There's no luxury markups, and their prices tend to start around $39, and their pieces are made with exceptional quality. They make long-lasting pieces crafted with care from the best noble metals with a 365-day warranty. One of the pieces I selected this time is this cute little butterfly necklace, and I love that the butterfly part on the necklace is so small because it just adds that extra little feeling of like being dressed up. And I just really love their more simplistic pieces like this one. I just think they're really simple and beautiful. I also selected this black ring, which I have a ring like this one that is the blue color, and I want to own all of the colors that they have because I just think these rings look so freaking cool. Like, they just look like those mood rings that I was obsessed with when I was a kid. Like, I just love the big, bold, moody rings. And then I also selected this very simplistic gold band ring, which I just think looks really nice when you're just trying to like throw on a ring and just have something on your hand to look really cute. I am obsessed with Ana Luisa's rings. Like, almost every time I select one or more of their rings because I just think they look really nice and they're such high quality. I wear these rings to work. Sometimes I accidentally wear them in the shower and they're amazing. Like, they don't leave any marks on my fingers. They're like the most high quality rings that I've ever owned. So yeah, I absolutely love Ana Luisa. Highly recommend checking them out, and you can use the link in the description to get 10% off your order with my discount gabbyreads10. So yeah, thank you so much to Ana Luisa for sponsoring today's video. And now, without further ado, let's jump into the books I read this month. So in the month of May, I managed to read 15 books, which is the most amount of books that I've read in the year of 2021, I'm pretty sure. As far as ratings go this month, I did only have 2 5-star books this month. So not a lot of new all-time favorites, but I had 8 4-star books. So I was really enjoying most of the books that I read this month. I had 3 3-star books and 2 2-star books. As far as the genres go for this month, I read 7 thrillers, which, like, what? We love a good thriller kick, you know what I'm saying? I read 2 romance books. I read 1 poetry, magical realism kind of book. I read 1 nonfiction book, and I read 4 young adult books that were kind of contemporary but also had some magical realism. It was all for a video. And then I also did want to make note that I listened to 10 audiobooks this month. So like 10 out of the 15 books that I read this month were audiobooks. Some of them I was listening to the audio while I was reading the book physically because I've discovered recently that that's like my favorite way to read a book. The least amount of energy required from me, which is apparently what I need these days. So yeah, let's just jump in to all of the things that I read. The very first book that I read this month was Dig by A.S. King. I actually listened to this one as an audiobook, and I ended up reading this book and these first couple of books for a video that I did at the start of this month, which was reading Kayla's favorite books. And this video was really awesome because I got to read so many things that I probably personally would have never picked up myself, including this book. This book is really interesting. It just follows these like 5 teenagers in this small town. This book has a lot to say about racism and the racism that can exist in small towns, and how sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes how the older generation has difficulty with like changing their ways and changing their bad behavior. I don't know, I just thought it was a really, really well written book. I thought it was so unique. Like, I've never read anything like this because some of the characters' names are like unconventional names. Like, we don't even know their actual names. Like, one of the characters just goes by Shoveler, one of them just goes goes by The Freak. Just because I didn't know the character's name doesn't mean I didn't know them well, because I felt like all of these characters were so fleshed out, and there were some passages in this book that just really stuck with me. Like, I just think it was really beautifully written. So I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. It was a very pleasant surprise. The second book I read this month was We Ride Upon Sticks by Quan Berry. This was also for that video, and this one unfortunately just wasn't for me. I actually listened to the audiobook for this as well as read along physically. I think I went into this expecting something a little bit weirder than what it ended up being. Essentially, this story just follows this group of girls who is on this sports team all together, and we just kind of follow from all of their points of views. It's like written in a very strange way where we don't really have a main character. We're just kind of following the team as a whole. And then there's also some discussion about witches and the Salem trials in this book. It takes place in the 80s. I really did love the 80s vibes in this book. Like, I was definitely here for that. But also, this book was just not for me. It was written in such a way that was so odd, and it was very dense. Like, there were so many words, and the paragraphs were like freaking whole page long, and I just couldn't get on board with the writing style personally. But I can see why other people might enjoy this book. It just wasn't my thing. I gave it 2 stars. And then I read the book Split Tooth. I actually listened to this one on audio as well. And I just want to apologize for the way that I came across in the video that I did with reading this book, because I did not understand when I was listening to this book that throat singing is in this book. Like, I didn't even know what throat singing was, and that's totally my bad. What I said in the video about this book, like, none of that was meant to be in a negative way. Like, I just wanted to make that clear. Like, I thought this book was really interesting. I thought it was so unique, and I've never heard anything like that before, so I think that's why I responded in that way. But yeah, this book taught me a lot about Indigenous culture, obviously, because I had no idea what throat singing even was before I listened to this audiobook. And if you didn't know anything about what this book is, it's kind of hard to explain. Like, I don't really know how to explain what this book is to you, but it's described as a poetry, magical realism kind of book. And so it's kind of hard to describe. Like, I've never read anything like this because it's part memoir and part fiction, and it's a story about this girl. I don't really know how to explain more than that what it's about, but it was a really interesting listening experience, and I ended up giving this book 3 stars. The next book I read for that video was Watch Over Me by Nina LaCour. This one is another like young adult kind of contemporary magical realism kind of feel book. It follows this girl, Mila, who goes and gets this job on this farm in California. They're like on the coast, and it's a farm, and at this farm she can like see ghosts and shit, and like everyone at the farm can like see these ghosts. This book is kind of an exploration of trauma and grief and how that can change your life, and this book was really sad and really depressing, but also like really freaking beautiful. I personally feel like this book would have been even better if it went more into like a horror direction, because like I could feel like this would be the perfect premise for a horror book, but it definitely doesn't go in that way. It's more of like a beautiful, really amazing story about grief and about going through traumatic things and how that can impact you as a person. And I just thought it was so beautiful and so well written, and I think I'm giving this somewhere between like a 3.5 and a 4 stars. I really enjoyed this. And then the last book that I read for that video was Elatsoe by Darcy Little Badger, and this book was my favorite book that I read for that video. It seems like it would be kind of out of my comfort zone just because it's I don't even know how to describe this one either, because it's kind of like a contemporary, but it's like it has some magical realism, some fantasy vibes, and this book has mystery, and that's kind of what this whole story ends up being about, because right at the start of this book, Ellie finds out that her cousin, Trevor, passed away in this car accident, and so she thinks that there was something more suspicious about how he died, and so she's basically going about trying to find out what actually happened to her cousin, and there's this whole mystery involved in this book about what happened to him. And this book was just, it was so good. I love the fact that Ellie is asexual, like our main character is asexual, and I just never see that representation in books, so I really appreciated that. I also just love all the little bits of magical realism in this book. I just thought it was so cool because there's like vampires in this book. There's just like casual mentions of these different fantasy elements, and that's like my ideal kind of fantasy. This kind of fantasy where it's just kind of brought into our world that we already know. Like, I loved it so much, and I just felt so connected to these characters and this family, and there was so much action and suspense and mystery, and I loved everything about this book, and I ended up giving this one 4.5 out of 5 stars. It's one of my favorites that I read this month. The next book that I read this month was an audiobook, and it was The Anatomy of Desire, and this one was provided to me by Libro because I'm a part of their ALC program, so this was one of the audiobooks that I received from them this month, and this is one that I had never even heard about before before receiving it from Libro, so I was pretty excited because this one is a full cast audiobook and it honestly feels like listen to a true crime podcast or something. I had to keep checking to see if this was a true story or not because the way that it really read like it was true crime, and I was so confused. I was like, is this fiction or is this not fiction? Like I didn't know. But this is fiction. I love that this book is following this girl named Cleo who's a social media influencer and she's getting accused of murder. It's just a really wild time. I also love that it takes place in Mammoth, California, because that is so cool. Mammoth is one of my favorite places in the world. It's like one of my top favorite vacation spots. I've only gone there once, but I do have plans to go back. And I just love the fact that it takes place in Mammoth because it's just so atmospheric of like the mountains and the lakes, and it made me want to go lay by a lake all day. And I ended up giving this one 3.5 out of 5 stars. And then the next 3 books that I read were all books that I read for the Thrillers About Obsession video that I did. I read Confessions on a 745, and this one is a thriller that follows these 2 women who are like on their morning train commute, and they kind of like spill their secrets to each other and like confess things about their lives to each other. And then from there, these characters decide to maybe act upon those things that they talked about. It kind of reminded me a lot of like The Kind Worth Killing by Peter Swanson. It had that like strangers on a train vibe, if you know what I'm saying. And this was my favorite of the 3 thrillers that I read for that video. I thought this one was really well done, and I was actually pretty surprised. Like there was one twist towards the middle that I was like, okay, that's incredibly obvious. Like I thought it was really obvious, but then there was one towards the end that I was actually really surprised by. And I don't know, I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. And then I read When I Was You by Amber Garza. Ended up being just okay for me, but this one, the premise was really interesting because it's about this woman who finds out that there's another woman living in her town with the same exact name. And she starts to become obsessed with this woman's life and trying to figure out like who she is and like what she's doing here. And like, it was just your pretty standard thriller. Like I didn't find anything too surprising about this book. I ended up giving it 3 stars. And then I also read Rewind by Catherine Ryan Howard for that video. And this is one that I was excited about because I previously read this author's book, The Nothing Man, and I really loved The Nothing Man. But this one is interesting. There's a lot going on in this book because we're following this influencer girl named Natalie who disappeared. It's another influencer, what do you know? Natalie disappeared, but then we're also following this guy, Andrew, who's like the manager at this like motel, and we find out that he's kind of like a total creeper, and he has like a camera in one of the rooms and he like watches his guests sleeping. It's super creepy. And one night when he pulls up the camera from the other room, he sees this dark figure viciously murder this woman in her bed and then come over and shut off the camera. And he's confused because he's like, he just witnessed a murder, but he also doesn't know how that person knew that he had a camera in the room. And that's basically the general premise of this book. It really takes off from there. My biggest critique with this book was that it had so many different points of views, and I don't think some of the point of views in this book were totally necessary. Like, I wasn't a huge fan of the journalist's point of view. I also wasn't a huge fan of the detective's point of view. I feel like this book would have been a lot more interesting if we just followed Natalie's perspective, because we do get to see her, like, leading up to her disappearance. We follow her point of view, and then I feel like one other point of view would have been fine. Like, I don't think it needed all of the different point of views. But I don't know, I thought this book was totally fine. It was totally readable, and I think I gave this one 3 stars as well. I also finally read The Plot, which this is one of my most anticipated thrillers of the year, and I actually just ended up listening to this as an audiobook, and I listened to this entire audiobook in one sitting, which I don't think I've ever done that for a 10-hour audiobook. I mean, granted, I was listening to it on like 2.5 times speed, so I was able to get through it in probably like about 5 hours, but still, I just sat in bed all morning. I listened to this entire thing in one go, and I was just obsessed. I was absolutely hooked. One of my favorite thrillers of the year for sure. This book is about this professor named Jacob who has this student who is just like the fucking worst. He's like so cocky, so annoying, and he says he has this idea for a book that's just gonna like blow everyone's mind, and he just knows it's gonna be a huge success. And so our professor is so irritated with this guy, but then he hears the plot, like the student tells him the plot, and he thinks it's one of the best plots he's ever heard. Then years pass by and he has not heard anything in the publishing world. He's like, I'm not hearing about this book. What's going on? He looks it up and he sees that that student actually died shortly after he was in his class. And so this professor, Jacob, decides to take the plot of the book and create it as if it were his own and release the book. The story just really takes off from there. I just thought this book was so wild. It was so well written. Some of the twists were just so interesting, and the ending of this book completely shocked me. I thought I had it figured out, but I really didn't. It was just so much fun. And yeah, it's definitely one of my most highly recommended thrillers. I loved this. And it was the only book that I gave a solid 5 stars to this month. Like, the next book that I read this month was The Burning Girls by CJ Tudor. This was our book troop book club pick for the month. I actually just did a live show with Kay discussing all of our thoughts on this book. So if you missed that, link will be down below for the live show. But this book was surprising. This was actually my favorite book troop book club pick so far, because lately all I've been choosing are a bunch of stinkers. This one is kind of hard to describe because it follows this woman who's a vicar, I believe is how you say it, and she's involved in the church. She moves to this new small town with her daughter, and this small town has all sorts of shit going on. I really loved the atmosphere in this book. I feel like sometimes this book felt more horror to me than thriller, which I really enjoyed. And I just really enjoy the mother-daughter relationship happening with this book with Jack and Flo. I thought there was a lot of plot twists at the end of this book, so much to the point where my brain was like spinning in circles. And my biggest critique with this book is that I think there are far too many characters. Like, it is really confusing to keep track of who is who. And I do feel like some of the characters are completely unnecessary, which is why I think it's an issue. But overall, I thought this book was a pretty fun time, and I am giving it somewhere between 3.5 and 4 stars, probably closer to 4 stars, because I did enjoy myself for the most part while I was reading this. Then the next book I read was The Good Sister by Sally Hepworth. This is one that I was sent this copy by St. Martin's Press, and then I also received the advanced listening copy from Libro like last month. And this book also really surprised me because I previously read a book from this author, The Mother-in-Law, and I didn't really enjoy that one, but this one was totally shocking. And this book is this thriller. We're following these two sisters named Rose and Fern. One of the sisters finds out that she cannot have children, so the other sister offers to have the child for her. And this book just ended up being a really intense, wild story, and it got a lot darker than I thought it would. I don't know if I would necessarily call this a thriller. I feel like it's more of like this intense family drama. I think my friend Mayana said that this book is more like a Lifetime movie, and I would definitely agree with that. But at the same time, I was just so surprised. Like, I love stories that follow sisters, so that's why I felt like I would really like this one. I was surprised by where this book ended up going. I thought it was really moving. The final plot twist of the book just really shocked me. And I don't know, I just thought it was all around really entertaining. I ended up giving it 4 stars. And then I ended up reading the Anthropocene reviewed by John Green. Did I totally just butcher that? Let's see.
Anthropocene.
Anthropocene. And I know you're like, you just made a video earlier this month saying that you're not going to read John Green anymore. And you're like, yeah, you're right. But Libro sent this book as an advanced listening copy this month, so I already had access to the audiobook. I guess I should have clarified in that video that I'm not against reading John Green if it's nonfiction, because this is like a nonfiction book, so I was pretty intrigued by that. Because I'm not a huge fan of John Green's young adult books, but since this is nonfiction, and I know it's like related to his podcast, I guess, which I didn't know he had, but I actually thought this book was really interesting, and it's really funny because this whole book is like him reviewing a bunch of different random things, and some of the things I thought were actually like really profound and really deep, and I really connected with them, and then other times it would be kind of like stupid things like reviewing Dr. Pepper or reviewing like a hot dog eating contest, you know? So this book was kind of like hard to review because some of it seemed so random, and then some of it actually felt really like interesting and really deep. So I think I ended up giving this one like 4 out of 5 stars. But either way, I really like John Green's writing style in nonfiction, and I really liked listening to the audiobook because he narrates the audiobook, and the fact that he talks about COVID actually in this audiobook was really interesting because he actually wrote this book in May last year, I think. So it was really cool to hear about some of his like fears and like living in a world with a pandemic, and I don't know, it was just really interesting to hear that perspective. And then the next book I read this month was May the Best Man Win. This is another audiobook that I listened to, and I was provided the audiobook from Macmillan, so thank you so much to Macmillan. I'm so sad because this is one of my most anticipated books of the year. I was really excited for this because the premise of this book sounds like everything, because it's a young adult romance book that follows our main character Jeremy, who's a trans character who gets involved in this like hate to love kind of thing with his ex Lucas because they're both running for homecoming king. and Lucas is their ex-boyfriend from before they transitioned. So I just thought it was gonna be so interesting because I was like, oh my gosh, it's like a hate to love, which I usually love hate to love, and it's a trans story, which I think is so important to read trans books because I always feel like I learn so much more about the trans experience whenever I read trans books. And since I am not trans, I would encourage you to go and check out reviews from trans reviewers because their reviews are definitely more important than my own. But this book was personally so disappointing for me, and I feel like the main issue I had with this book is that both of the main characters were so unlikable and just rude, and I don't know, like they were just really rude to each other, and they crossed the line on so many things that I just thought was not okay, and I just couldn't get on board with it personally. It just like really rubbed me the wrong way. I mean, if you've read the book, then you know what they do to each other, and I just thought that that was so not cool. And it makes it hard to root for the main characters when they're both just being so shitty to each other. But yeah, I ended up giving this one 2 stars, and I thought it was super disappointing. And then the last book that I read this month was Ties That Tether, and this one is a romance book that I've been wanting to read for a couple of months now, and I actually just recently tried a chapter of this in that try a chapter video that I just uploaded a few days ago. This book surprised the hell out of me with that first chapter, so I just immediately continued to read it because I couldn't even control myself. And this book is about, we're following this woman who is Nigerian, and she is expected by her family to date and marry a Nigerian man and have kids with a Nigerian man. At the beginning of this book, she starts to fall for this white man named Raphael, and her family is just really against it and not okay with the idea of her with a white man. This book was really interesting with the discussion about your culture and how to honor your culture while also having freedom over your own life and making your own decisions. Like, I thought that aspect of the book was really interesting, but the romance itself in this book ended up just being okay for me. I mean, I really liked both of the characters, but the romance itself, it just felt a little bit rushed. It felt a little bit forced. Like, I don't know, I just couldn't really get on board with the romance in this book. I still was able to like fly through this book in like a day and a half, so I still think this book was totally easy to read, totally readable. It had a lot of great discussion with her family, and I did really like the characters. It was just the romance itself that I wasn't a huge fan of, but everything else in this book I thought was really great, and I ended up giving this book 3.5 out of 5 stars. Those are all of the books that I read in the month of May. It was a really, really great reading month. I mean, I enjoyed almost every single thing that I read except for those few books that I just didn't really enjoy. But yeah, I was gonna mention too that I also, I did start Rebecca because I know that I was saying this month that I wanted to do a Rebecca reading vlog, but I started it and I only got like a little bit less than 50 pages into it before I decided to DNF because I could not. And this is the case that I feel like I have with most classics, which is why I just don't know if I should read classics because I always feel this way where I get into it and then I just can't deal with the writing style, or it just feels like it like bores me to tears trying to read books like this. Like, I don't know why. I even had the audiobook. I was trying to push through with the audiobook and reading it, and I could not. It was gonna put me in a reading slump. I could not care less, you know what I'm saying? Those are all the books that I read in May. If you've read any of these books, then please let me know your thoughts on them. And let me know, how many books did you read in the month of May? What was your favorite book that you read in the month of May? And once again, I just wanted to say thank you so much to Ana Luisa for sponsoring today's video, and don't forget to click on that link in my description and get 10% off your order. That is all. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you very soon with a new video. Bye.